The stagecoach rattled into Benton, Montana territory, on a blistering July afternoon in 1876, carrying a woman who had gambled everything on a promise from a stranger. Helena Turner pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the dusty Main Street unfold before her eyes while her 4 sons fidgeted on the worn leather seats around her. At 32 years old, she had buried one husband already and was about to meet another, a man whose carefully worded letters had painted a picture of lonely acres and a house that echoed with silence. "Mama, is that him?" Her oldest boy, Thomas, pointed toward a tall figure standing outside the general store, but Helena shook her head. Thomas was 12, old enough to understand that their arrival in this rough Montana town meant a complete transformation of everything they had known back in Pennsylvania. "We will know him when we see him, sweetheart. He said he would be waiting at the station with his wagon." Helena smoothed down her traveling dress, suddenly aware of how threadbare the fabric had become after 3 years of widowhood. Her late husband, Samuel, had died in a mining accident, leaving her with 4 growing boys and debts that seemed to multiply like weeds in an untended garden. The letters from Josiah Zimmerman had arrived like a lifeline when she had placed her advertisement in the matrimonial news, and now here she was, about to become a rancher's wife in a territory she had only read about in newspapers. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of a small wooden building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Benton Station." Helena gathered her reticule and began herding her boys toward the door. Thomas led the way, followed by 10-year-old William, 8-year-old Daniel, and little 6-year-old Robert, who clutched a wooden horse that his father had carved for him before the accident. The Montana heat hit Helena like a physical force as she stepped down from the coach, and she raised one hand to shield her eyes from the relentless sun. The driver began tossing down their trunks and bags, the sum total of their earthly possessions after she had sold everything else to pay Samuel's debts. Her heart hammered in her chest as she scanned the small crowd gathered near the station, wondering which of these weathered faces belonged to the man who had promised her a home and security for her children. "Mrs. Turner." The voice came from behind her, deep and slightly hesitant, and Helena turned to find herself looking up at one of the tallest men she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that stretched the fabric of his work shirt and hands that looked strong enough to bend horseshoes. His face was lean and tanned from years under the sun, with crow's feet at the corners of his blue eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. Instead, he looked almost as nervous as she felt, his hat clutched in his hands and his dark hair ruffled by the hot wind that swept down the main street. "Mr. Zimmerman." Helena found her voice, though it came out softer than she had intended. She extended her hand, and he took it carefully, as if afraid he might hurt her with his obvious strength. "Josiah, please. I hope your journey was not too difficult." His eyes moved past her to the 4 boys standing in a tight cluster behind their mother, and something flickered across his face that Helena could not quite read. He had known about her sons, of course. She had been honest in her letters, explaining that she came as a package, that any man who wanted her hand would also be taking on the responsibility of 4 grieving boys who still woke up crying for their father some nights. "Long, but we are here safely, and that is what matters." Helena turned and drew her sons forward one by one, introducing them. Thomas offered his hand like a young man, his jaw set in a way that reminded Helena painfully of Samuel. William gave a shy nod, his freckled face suspicious. Daniel tried to hide behind Thomas, and little Robert simply stared up at the giant stranger with wide eyes. Josiah crouched down, bringing himself closer to their level, and Helena felt something warm bloom in her chest at the gesture. "I am pleased to meet all of you," he said, his voice gentle despite its depth. "I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. There is a creek for fishing and swimming, and I have 3 horses, some cattle, chickens, and a dog named Bear who is going to be very excited to meet you." "Is Bear big?" Robert asked, his first words since they had left Pennsylvania 3 weeks ago, and Josiah smiled for the first time, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. "Big enough, but gentle as a lamb with children. He was raised around my neighbor's kids, so he knows how to behave." Josiah straightened and met Helena's eyes again. "I have the wagon ready. We can load your things and head out whenever you are ready. I know you must all be tired and hungry." The ride to the ranch gave Helena her first real look at Montana territory. The landscape was unlike anything she had known back east, with rolling hills that stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks still touched with snow even in July. Wildflowers dotted the grasslands in splashes of purple and yellow, and the sky seemed impossibly vast, a blue dome that made her feel very small and very far from everything she had ever known. The boys sat in the back of the wagon with their trunks, pointing out hawks and prairie dogs, their voices rising with excitement despite their exhaustion. Josiah handled the horses with easy competence, his large hands light on the reins. For a while, they rode in silence, and Helena found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. He had a strong profile, with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed with stubble. His letters had been articulate and kind, but reading words on paper was nothing like sitting beside a flesh and blood man who would soon be her husband. "I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you right away," Josiah said suddenly, as if he had been gathering his courage to speak. "I have prepared a room for you, separate from mine. I know this is all very sudden and strange, and I want you and the boys to feel comfortable. We can take our time getting to know each other properly." Relief flooded through Helena, mixed with something else she could not quite name. "Thank you. That is very considerate." She folded her hands in her lap, feeling the calluses that had formed from taking in laundry and mending to keep her family fed. "Your letters mentioned that you have been alone on your ranch for some time." 5 years, Josiah confirmed. "I came out here in '71 with my brother, planning to build something together. But he got sick that first winter, pneumonia, and he did not make it to spring. I have been running the place by myself ever since. It is a good ranch, but it is meant for a family, not just one man." He glanced back at the boys, and Helena saw something like longing in his face. "I always wanted children, a house full of noise and life. When I saw your advertisement that you were a mother looking for a fresh start, it seemed like maybe we could help each other." "I think we can," Helena said softly, and she meant it. There was something fundamentally decent about this man, something solid and trustworthy that called to the part of her that had been so terribly afraid these past 3 years, wondering how she would keep her boys fed and clothed and safe. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, and Helena felt her breath catch. It was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure built of timber with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. Outbuildings dotted the property, including a barn, a chicken coop, and what looked like a smokehouse. The creek Josiah had mentioned sparkled in the afternoon sun, running along the eastern edge of the property, and everything looked well maintained and cared for, a testament to years of hard work. "It is beautiful," Helena said, and she saw Josiah's shoulders relax slightly at her words. "It is home," he replied simply. "Or at least, I hope it will be home for all of you." Bear turned out to be a massive shaggy dog of indeterminate breed who came bounding out of the barn at the sound of the wagon, barking joyfully. The boys tumbled out of the wagon bed, their tiredness forgotten, and within minutes, they were rolling in the grass with the ecstatic animal, their laughter ringing across the yard. Helena watched them with tears pricking her eyes. It had been so long since she had heard them laugh like that, with such unguarded joy. Josiah helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist, and for just a moment, they stood close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him. "Let me show you the house," he said, releasing her perhaps a fraction slower than necessary. The interior was clean but sparse, the home of a man who had been living alone with no thought for decoration or comfort beyond the basics. The main room held a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table with mismatched chairs, and a few pieces of simple furniture. The kitchen was well equipped, with a cast iron stove and shelves lined with supplies. Josiah led her upstairs, showing her the bedrooms he had prepared. "This is yours," he said, opening a door to reveal a room with a large bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the creek. "The boys can share the room next door. There are 2 beds already, and I can build more if needed. My room is at the end of the hall." He paused, looking almost embarrassed. "I changed the linens this morning and tried to make everything nice. I'm not sure I did it right." Helena stepped into the room, running her hand over the quilt that covered the bed. It was a wedding ring pattern, finely stitched and clearly old. "This is beautiful work. It was my mother's. She died before my brother and I came west, but I brought some of her things with me." Josiah leaned against the doorframe, too large for the delicate domesticity of the bedroom. "I want you to feel welcome here, Helena. I know I am just a stranger to you right now, but I promise I will do everything in my power to be a good husband and a good guardian to your sons." "They need a father figure," Helena admitted, sitting on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm and comfortable, a luxury after weeks of stagecoach benches and cheap hotel beds. "Thomas tries to be the man of the family, but he is only 12. He should be allowed to be a boy for a while longer." She looked up at Josiah, seeing the earnestness in his face. "Samuel was a good man, but he has been gone for 3 years. The boys barely remember him now, except for Thomas. I think they are ready to love someone new if that someone proves worthy of their trust." "I will do my best to earn it," Josiah promised, "from all of you." The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church in Benton, with the minister's wife and the general store owner serving as witnesses. Helena wore her best dress, a deep blue silk that she had saved from her life before widowhood, and Josiah wore a suit that looked almost painfully new, as if he had purchased it specifically for this occasion. The boys sat in the front pew, scrubbed clean and dressed in their Sunday clothes, watching with solemn faces as their mother became Mrs. Zimmerman. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Josiah bent to kiss Helena's cheek, a chaste brush of his lips that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her. His hand found hers as they turned to face the small gathering, and she held on tight, feeling as if she were stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. They had a simple meal at the hotel restaurant in town, a celebration of sorts, though Helena could see that Josiah was uncomfortable with the attention and eager to return to the ranch. The boys were on their best behavior, even little Robert managing to keep his shirt relatively clean, and Helena felt a swell of pride in her children. They had been through so much, had adapted to so many changes, and now here they were, beginning yet another new chapter. On the ride back to the ranch, with the boys drowsing in the back of the wagon and the summer evening painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Josiah reached over and took Helena's hand. She startled slightly but did not pull away, and they rode like that for a while, connected by that simple touch. "I meant what I said before," Josiah told her quietly. "I will not rush you into anything. We can take this at whatever pace feels right to you." "I appreciate that," Helena replied, and she did, but she also found herself wondering what it would be like to truly be this man's wife in every sense of the word. He was kind and patient, hardworking and gentle, everything she could have hoped for in a partner. But more than that, she was beginning to realize that she was attracted to him, drawn to his quiet strength, and the way his face softened when he looked at her sons. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that gradually began to feel like normalcy. Helena threw herself into making the ranch house a home, cleaning and organizing, adding small touches that transformed the bachelor dwelling into a family residence. She sewed curtains for the windows, using fabric from her carefully hoarded supplies, and planted herbs in a small garden near the kitchen door. The boys adapted with the resilience of children, claiming the ranch as their new kingdom. Thomas began following Josiah everywhere, soaking up knowledge about ranching and horses and the countless skills required to survive in Montana territory. Josiah was endlessly patient with the boy's questions, treating him like a young man rather than a child. And Helena watched as her oldest son began to straighten his shoulders and lose some of the haunted look that had lingered in his eyes since his father's death. William discovered a love for the animals, spending hours in the barn with the horses and helping to collect eggs from the chickens each morning. Daniel proved to have a gift for fishing, and many evenings found him at the creek with a pole Josiah had made for him, bringing home trout for dinner with immense pride. Little Robert attached himself to Bear and could usually be found wherever the big dog was, chattering away as if the animal could understand every word. Helena found herself settling into the rhythms of ranch life more easily than she had expected. The work was hard, endless even, but there was a satisfaction in it that she had not known in her previous life. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to churn butter, to preserve vegetables for the coming winter. Josiah praised her efforts with genuine appreciation, and she found herself working harder to see that look of pleasure in his eyes. They ate their meals together at the big table, and gradually the conversation became easier, more natural. Josiah told stories about his early days in Montana, the challenges and the triumphs, and Helena shared memories of her life back east, carefully editing out the worst of the poverty and fear that had marked her final years there. The boys chattered about their daily adventures, and slowly, the house began to fill with exactly the kind of noise and life that Josiah had said he wanted. At night, Helena lay in her room and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle in the distance, the whisper of wind through the grass, the creek's constant murmur. Sometimes, she heard Josiah moving around in his room at the end of the hall, and she wondered if he lay awake thinking of her the way she increasingly found herself thinking of him. He never pushed, never demanded anything beyond her companionship at meals and her help with the household tasks, but she saw the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, a hunger in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. One evening in late August, after the boys had been sent to bed and Helena was finishing the washing up, Josiah came to stand beside her at the kitchen basin. "Here, let me help with that," he said, taking the dish towel from her hands. Their fingers brushed in the exchange and neither of them moved away. "You do not have to," Helena protested weakly, but Josiah was already drying the plates she had washed, stacking them with careful precision. "I want to," he said simply. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "Helena, I have been thinking. The boys seem to be settling in well. Thomas is a natural with the horses and the younger ones are thriving, but I wanted to ask how you are doing. Truly. This is a big change from your life before, and I want to make sure you are happy here. Helena set down the pot she had been scrubbing and turned to face him fully. In the lamplight, his face was all strong planes and shadows, and she thought not for the first time what a handsome man he was, in a rough-hewn, completely masculine way. "I am happy," she said honestly. "Happier than I have been in a very long time. You have been so good to us, Josiah. Better than I had any right to expect." "It is not about what you have a right to expect," Josiah said, setting down the dish towel and taking a step closer. "You are my wife now, and those boys are my responsibility. More than that, I want you to be happy. I want to make you happy." He reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away, and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Helena found herself leaning into the touch, starved for this kind of gentle affection after so long alone. "You do make me happy," she whispered. And then, gathering her courage, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, Josiah went completely still, as if shocked by her boldness, and then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he returned the kiss with a fervor that took her breath away. He kissed her like a man who had been dying of thirst and had finally found water, and Helena responded in kind, her hands fisting in his shirt as 3 years of loneliness and fear melted away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Josiah rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the day you stepped off that stagecoach," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "But I did not want to rush you or make you feel pressured." "I know," Helena said, her hands still pressed against his chest where she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. "And I appreciate your patience. But Josiah, we are married, truly married, and I think I am ready for this to be a real marriage in every way." She felt her cheeks heat with the boldness of her words, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "If you want that too." "Want it?" Josiah laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. "Helena, I have been going half mad wanting you, but I need you to be sure. I need to know that you are doing this because you want to, not because you feel obligated." "I want to," Helena said firmly. "I want you, Josiah. You have been so good to me and my boys. You have given us a home and security and kindness. But more than that, I find myself thinking about you constantly. The way you smile when Robert tells you one of his rambling stories, the patience you show Thomas when he makes mistakes, the strength in your hands and the gentleness in your eyes. I am falling in love with you, and I do not want to sleep alone in that room anymore when I could be with you." Josiah swept her up in his arms with a whoop of happiness that made her laugh and shush him at the same time, mindful of the boys sleeping upstairs. He carried her through the house and up the stairs to his room, setting her down gently beside the big bed that dominated the space. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her again, slowly this time, thoroughly, as if he had all the time in the world to learn the taste of her. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I think I have loved you since your first letter, when you wrote about wanting to give your sons a better life. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Helena assured him. And then there were no more words, only the quiet sounds of two lonely people finding solace and joy and passion in each other's arms, finally becoming husband and wife in truth as well as name. The next morning, Helena woke wrapped in Josiah's arms, her head pillowed on his broad chest. Sunlight streamed through the window, and she could hear the boys moving around in their room, their voices carrying through the walls. She should get up, should start breakfast, should begin the endless round of daily tasks. But for just a moment, she allowed herself to simply be safe and warm and loved. Josiah stirred beside her, his arms tightening around her. "Good morning, wife," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep, and then he smiled, that transformative smile that made him look years younger. "I could get used to waking up like this." "So could I," Helena admitted, tilting her face up for a kiss. It was sweet and slow, a promise of more to come, and she felt desire kindle in her belly again, amazed that her body could still respond this way after years of dormancy. A thundering of feet on the stairs made them break apart, and Josiah groaned good-naturedly as they heard the boys shouting about being hungry. "Duty calls," he said, pressing one more quick kiss to Helena's forehead before climbing out of bed and reaching for his clothes. Helena watched him dress with unabashed appreciation, admiring the play of muscles under his skin, the evidence of years of hard physical labor. When they came down to breakfast together, Helena worried that the boys might notice something different, might have questions about why their mother had not come from her usual room. But if they noticed, they said nothing, too busy arguing about who got to help Josiah fix the fence in the north pasture and who had to stay behind to help with the garden weeding. "Everyone can come to the north pasture," Josiah decided, settling the argument with the wisdom of Solomon. "It is a beautiful day and we can make a picnic of it. Your mother can bring lunch, and after the fence is fixed, we can all go swimming in the deep pool by the bend in the creek. How does that sound?" The enthusiastic response from the boys made Helena laugh, and she shooed them outside to do their morning chores while she began preparing food for their outing. Josiah lingered in the kitchen, stealing kisses when the boys were not looking, and Helena felt lighter than she had in years, as if a weight she had not known she was carrying had finally been lifted. The days shortened as summer gave way to fall, and the ranch prepared for the coming winter. Josiah hired a few local men to help with the cattle roundup and the harvest, and the ranch bustled with activity. Helena found herself cooking for a small army, but she enjoyed the challenge and the camaraderie that developed among the workers. They were respectful men, mostly young cowboys looking for honest work, and they treated her with a deference that made her feel valued. One of the hired hands, a jovial young man named Pete, proved to be a gifted storyteller, and many evenings found the whole crew gathered around the fire pit outside, listening to his tales of cattle drives and wild adventures while Helena and Josiah sat close together, her hand in his. The boys hung on Pete's every word, their eyes wide with wonder, and Helena was grateful for these experiences that were shaping them into confident, capable young men. Thomas, in particular, seemed to bloom under Josiah's tutelage. At 12, he was old enough to take on real responsibility, and Josiah treated him accordingly, teaching him to rope and brand, to judge the quality of cattle, to read the weather signs that warned of coming storms. The hero worship in Thomas's eyes when he looked at Josiah was unmistakable, and one night, as they lay in bed together, Helena thanked her husband for the gift he was giving her eldest son. "He needed a father," Josiah said simply, his hand stroking her hair where it lay spread across his chest. "They all do, but Thomas especially, because he is old enough to understand what he lost and young enough to still desperately need guidance. I am honored that he is willing to accept me in that role." "He loves you," Helena said. "They all do. You are not just filling Samuel's shoes, Josiah. You are making your own place in their hearts." "And in yours?" Josiah asked, tipping her face up to meet his eyes. "Do I have a place in your heart, Helena?" "You have all of my heart," she replied, and she meant it. Somewhere between that first nervous meeting at the Benton station And now, she had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with this gentle giant of a man. He had proven himself in 1,000 small ways, through patience and kindness and unwavering support. He had taken on her ready-made family without complaint, had opened his home and his life to them, and in doing so, had won her heart entirely. Winter arrived with a vengeance in early November, a blizzard that dumped 3 feet of snow on the ranch and trapped them all inside for nearly a week. Helena had been worried about cabin fever, about how the boys would handle being cooped up, but Josiah turned it into an adventure. He taught them card games and checkers, showed them how to carve small figures from scraps of wood, and told stories about his own childhood back in Ohio before he and his brother had headed west to seek their fortunes. On the 3rd day of the storm, while the boys were napping in the afternoon, worn out from a snowball fight in the brief lull between squalls, Josiah pulled Helena into his lap by the fire and held her close. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear, "about the future, about how we want things to be." "What do you mean?" Helena asked, tilting her head to look at him. "I mean that I love you and your boys more than I ever thought possible to love anyone. You have made this house a home, Helena. You have given me the family I always dreamed of. But I find myself wanting more if you do. I would like for us to have children together, a baby that is ours from the start. What do you think about that?" Helena felt her heart swell with emotion. She was 32, not too old to have more children, and the thought of carrying Josiah's baby, of giving him a child of his own blood, filled her with joy. "I think that sounds wonderful," she said, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "I would love to have your baby, Josiah." His smile was radiant, and he kissed her deeply, his hands tangling in her hair. "You have made me the happiest man in Montana," he said when they finally broke apart. "No, the happiest man in the whole country." By the time spring arrived, painting the Montana landscape in fresh greens and wildflowers, Helena was 3 months pregnant. The boys had received the news with varying degrees of enthusiasm, Thomas looking a bit uncomfortable with the whole thing but eventually declaring it was all right with him, William and Daniel thinking a baby brother would be the best thing ever, and Robert hoping for a sister he could play dolls with, which made the adults hide their smiles. Josiah was attentive to the point of being almost comical, insisting Helena rest when she felt perfectly fine and treating her as if she were made of spun glass. She finally had to sit him down and explain that she had done this 4 times before and knew her own limits, but she secretly appreciated his concern, so different from Samuel's practical indifference during her previous pregnancies. As her belly grew, Helena found herself marveling at how different this experience was. She was not worried about money or food or how they would manage another mouth to feed. She was not alone, struggling to care for other small children while carrying a new one. Instead, she was cherished and supported, with a husband who rubbed her aching back and brought her tea in the morning, and looked at her expanding waistline with such pride and joy that it made her feel beautiful despite her ungainly size. Summer brought ranch work in abundance, and this year the boys were old enough to be genuine help. Thomas, now 13, could do nearly as much work as a grown man, and he took fierce pride in pulling his weight. William and Daniel had their own set of responsibilities, feeding animals and weeding the garden and helping their mother with the endless tasks that kept a household running. Even Robert, at 7, had his jobs, collecting eggs and keeping the wood box filled. Helena watched her sons flourish under Josiah's guidance and the healthy outdoor life, and she thanked God every day for leading her to place that advertisement in the matrimonial news. She had come to Montana territory a frightened widow with 4 hungry children, and barely enough money to survive. And she had found not just security but love, deep and abiding and true. In late September, as the leaves began to turn gold and the air took on the crisp edge of approaching fall, Helena went into labor. Josiah, who had faced down stampeding cattle and winter blizzards without flinching, turned white as a sheet and had to be ordered by the midwife from Benton to either make himself useful or get out of the way. He chose useful, holding Helena's hand and murmuring encouragement as she worked to bring their child into the world. When the baby's first cries filled the room, Josiah had tears streaming down his face. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant in Helena's arms. "A healthy boy with a good, strong set of lungs on him." "A son," Josiah breathed, staring at the baby with such wonder that Helena felt her own eyes fill with tears. "We have a son, Helena." "We do," she agreed, exhausted but happy beyond measure. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, of course, but suddenly, looking at her husband's face, Helena knew what felt right. "I was thinking James," she said. "James Samuel Zimmerman. James for a new beginning, and Samuel to honor the man who gave me my first for boys." Josiah looked at her for a long moment, then leaned down to kiss her forehead. "That is perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Helena. Thank you for coming to Montana, for taking a chance on a lonely rancher who did not know how empty his life was until you filled it." The boys crowded into the room once the midwife had finished her work, eager to meet their new brother. They gathered around the bed, staring at the tiny baby with fascination and a touch of bewilderment. Thomas looked proud and a bit protective, already stepping into the role of eldest brother. William wanted to know when the baby would be big enough to play with. Daniel asked if he could teach him to fish. Robert, who had been displaced as the baby of the family, seemed uncertain until Helena pulled him close with her free arm and assured him he would always be special to her. "This is James," Josiah told them, his voice full of pride. "Your brother. And he is going to grow up knowing how lucky he is to have 4 big brothers to look after him and teach him everything they know." Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. James was a good-natured infant, sleeping well and growing fast, and Helena juggled motherhood with the running of the household with the ease of long practice. Josiah proved to be a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor when James was fussy at night, and looking utterly content with a baby drooling on his shoulder while he went about his work. Winter came again, and this time they were a complete family, gathered around the fire in the evenings while the snow piled high outside. Helena would nurse James while Josiah read aloud from the newspapers that came from Benton, keeping them connected to the wider world. The older boys played their games or worked on their schoolwork, for Helena insisted they keep up with their education despite the demands of ranch life. One evening in late January, after the baby had been put to bed, and the older boys were absorbed in building an elaborate house of cards at the table, Josiah pulled Helena onto the porch despite the cold. He wrapped her in his arms and a heavy blanket, and together they looked out at the winter landscape, the snow blue white under the moon. "Are you happy?" he asked her, not for the first time. It seemed to be a question he needed to ask periodically, as if he could not quite believe that she was content. "Deliriously happy," Helena assured him, snuggling closer to his warmth. "Sometimes I lie awake at night and think about where I was 2 years ago, how desperate and frightened I was. And then I look at my life now, at you and the boys and James, at this beautiful ranch and the home we have made together, and I can hardly believe it is real." "It is real," Josiah promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You are my wife, the mother of my son, the woman I love more than my own life. This is real, Helena. This is forever." "Forever," Helena echoed, and she felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was not a temporary respite from hardship, or a convenient arrangement that might dissolve when times got tough. This was a marriage built on mutual respect and growing affection that had blossomed into deep love. This was a family, forged not just by blood but by choice and commitment and the daily decision to love and support each other. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of a growing family. Thomas turned 16 and began talking about claiming his own land someday, though he assured Josiah he would never be far from the ranch that had become his true home. William developed a talent for horse training that had neighboring ranchers bringing their animals to him by the time he was 15. Daniel proved to have a head for numbers and helped keep the ranch accounts with careful precision. Robert, the sensitive one, showed an artistic bent that had him sketching everything he saw and talking about maybe becoming a traveling artist someday. James grew from a baby into a toddler, and then a boisterous little boy who followed his older brothers everywhere and worshipped them almost as much as he adored his father. By the time he was 3, Helena was pregnant again, and this time she gave Josiah the daughter he had not realized he was hoping for. They named her Grace, and Josiah carried her everywhere, utterly besotted with his tiny daughter. The ranch prospered under Josiah's management and with the help of his growing sons. They expanded the herd, built new outbuildings, and improved the house with additions and upgrades. Helena's garden grew into a substantial operation that provided not just for their family, but enough excess to sell in Benton, giving her a small income of her own that she saved carefully, still unable to completely shake the fear of poverty that had marked her years of widowhood. When Josiah discovered her little hoard of money hidden in a jar in the back of the cupboard, he sat her down and took her hands in his. "Helena, you do not need to hide money away like this," he said gently. "Everything I have is yours. This ranch, the cattle, the bank account in town. It is all ours together, and I would never leave you destitute the way Samuel did." "I know that," Helena said, feeling foolish but also needing him to understand. "But those years, Josiah, those years after Samuel died, I was so scared all the time. Scared I would not be able to feed my boys, that we would end up on the street, that I would fail them. It is hard to let go of that fear completely, even though I know I am safe now." "You are safe," Josiah assured her, pulling her into his arms. "I have made provisions, legal documents drawn up by the lawyer in Benton. If anything happens to me, everything goes to you outright, no questions, no challenges. You and the children will always be provided for. You have my word, and more than that, you have my legal guarantee." Helena clung to him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said fiercely. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I lost Samuel, and I know that I could lose you too, and I do not think I could survive it." "You could," Josiah said firmly. "Because you are the strongest person I know. But you will not have to, because I plan to be around for a very long time. We are going to grow old together, Helena. We are going to see our sons settled on their own land, see James grow up, watch Grace become a young woman. We are going to have grandchildren to spoil and stories to tell. I promise you that." It was a promise he kept. The years continued to pass, bringing challenges and triumphs in equal measure. There were hard winters and drought summers, cattle lost to disease and crops failed by hail. There were injuries and illnesses that left Helena praying desperately for her family's safety. But there were also moments of transcendent joy. Thomas's wedding to a schoolteacher from Benton when he was 23, William buying his own small spread just 2 miles down the road, Daniel heading off to study bookkeeping in Helena proper, and Robert selling his first painting to a buyer from back east. Through it all, Helena and Josiah remained the steady center of their family's universe. Their love, which had begun as a tentative arrangement between strangers, had deepened into something unshakable. They knew each other's habits and moods, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, and still felt a thrill when their hands touched in passing. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Josiah took Helena back to Benton, to the very spot where he had first seen her step off the stagecoach with her 4 frightened boys. They stood there in the summer sunshine, hand in hand, while their now nearly grown children watched with amusement and affection. "I stood right here," Josiah said, pointing to a spot near the station, "and I saw you, and I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. But I was also terrified because what did I know about being a husband, let alone a father to 4 boys? I thought I was going to fail them. But you did not," Helena said, squeezing his hand. "You succeeded beyond anything I could have imagined. You gave my sons a father when they desperately needed one. You gave me love and partnership and security. You gave all of us a home." "We gave each other a home," Josiah corrected, pulling her close despite the public setting and the catcalls from their sons. "I was so lonely before you came, Helena. I had land and cattle and a roof over my head, but I did not have a life. You and the boys gave me a life worth living." James, now 12 and gangly with growth, made a face at his parents' public display of affection, while little Grace, 8 years old and wise beyond her years, just smiled. The older boys, men now really, looked on with satisfaction. They remembered, at least dimly, the hard years after their biological father's death. They remembered their mother's worry and fear. And they knew, with the certainty of lived experience, how much Josiah had transformed all their lives. That night, lying in bed in the hotel room Josiah had rented as a treat, Helena traced the lines of her husband's face with gentle fingers. He was 47 now, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, his face more deeply lined by years of weather and work. But to her, he was as handsome as he had been that first day and infinitely more dear. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking on a widow with 4 sons, it was not what most men would choose." "Not for a single second," Josiah replied, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "You were exactly what I needed, Helena. I told you that day we met that I always wanted a family, and you gave me that. You gave me 4 sons to raise and love, and then you gave me 2 more children of my own blood, but I love them all the same. Thomas, William, Daniel, and Robert are my boys just as much as James is, and I have never thought of them any differently." "They know that," Helena assured him. "They call you Pa now, not because I asked them to, but because that is what you are to them. Samuel gave them life, but you gave them a childhood and a future. We gave them that together," Josiah said, pulling her close. "Everything good in my life came from the day you arrived in Benton. I was a lonely rancher who did not know what he was missing until you showed me. Thank you, Helena, for answering my letter, for taking a chance on a stranger, for loving me." "Thank you," Helena whispered back, "for always wanting a family, for being willing to take on mine, for being the kind of man who could love another man's children as his own. You saved us, Josiah. You saved me." They kissed then, slow and sweet, a reaffirmation of the vows they had made 15 years before in the little church in Benton. And outside the window, the Montana night stretched vast and star-filled, a silent witness to a love story that had begun with a leap of faith and had grown into something strong enough to weather any storm. The years continued their steady march, bringing more changes and new chapters. Thomas and his wife presented Helena and Josiah with their first grandchild, a squalling baby girl they named Helena after her grandmother, and Josiah walked around in a daze for a week, unable to believe he was a grandfather. William married a rancher's daughter and settled into raising horses full-time. Daniel opened a bookkeeping business in Benton and became the go-to man for financial advice in the county. Robert, true to his word, traveled for a few years with his art before settling in St. Louis. Though he came home every summer without fail, James grew into a young man who was the perfect blend of his parents, with Josiah's size and strength, and Helena's quick mind and warm heart. He had no interest in leaving the ranch, declaring from the time he was 15 that he would stay and work the land beside his father, and eventually take over when Josiah was ready to step back. Grace proved to be as stubborn and independent as both her parents combined, with plans to become a teacher and maybe even go to college if they would let women in by the time she was old enough. Through it all, the ranch remained the heart of the family, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations, where grandchildren learned to ride and fish and do all the things their parents had learned a generation before. Helena's kitchen was always full, her table always crowded, and she would not have had it any other way. On a crisp October evening when Helena was 52 and Josiah was 62, they sat together on the porch swing he had built for her 10th anniversary. The house was quiet for once, with James and Grace both in town at a church social, and the older boys married off and living their own lives. It was just the two of them, the way it had been in those early days before James was born, except now they had 20 years of shared history behind them. "Do you know what I was thinking about today?" Helena asked, her head resting on Josiah's shoulder as they swayed gently. "I was thinking about that first meal I cooked for you, how nervous I was, how I burned the biscuits and oversalted the stew." Josiah laughed, a sound that still made Helena's heart lift. "You were terrified and trying so hard to hide it. I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met, stepping off that stage into a completely unknown situation with 4 children depending on you." "I was not brave," Helena corrected. "I was desperate. But then I met you, and I realized I had made the right choice. You were everything your letters promised and more." "I was lonely and awkward and had no idea how to be a husband or father," Josiah reminded her. "You were the one who taught me how to be part of a family, Helena. Before you, I was just surviving, going through the motions. After you, I was living." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold as it sank toward the western mountains. Cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere a coyote called, the sounds as familiar as breathing after all these years. "I want to say something," Josiah said suddenly, sitting up straighter and turning to face Helena. His face was serious, and she felt a flutter of concern until he took both her hands in his, and she saw that his eyes were bright with emotion, not worry. "I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and that love has only grown deeper with every passing year. You are my wife, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. I know I do not say it often enough, because I am not good with fancy words, but I need you to know that every single day with you has been a gift." Helena felt tears slide down her cheeks, happy tears that she did not bother to wipe away. "I love you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. You took my broken family and made us whole. You showed me what real love looks like, patient and kind and steadfast. I thank God every day that I found your name in that matrimonial news, that I had the courage to write to you, that you were willing to take a chance on a widow with 4 sons." "Best chance I ever took," Josiah said, pulling her into his arms. "The only chance that ever really mattered." As the sun completed its descent, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Helena and Josiah remained on the porch swing, wrapped in each other's arms and in the certainty of a love that had weathered 20 years and would weather whatever years remained to them. They had started as strangers bound by necessity, but they had become soulmates, their lives so intertwined that neither could imagine existence without the other. The sound of a wagon in the distance announced the return of James and Grace from town, and Helena reluctantly pulled away from Josiah's embrace. There was always work to be done, children to care for, a household to run. But now those tasks were not burdens but joys, pieces of a life well lived and deeply satisfying. As they stood to go inside and greet their youngest children, Josiah caught Helena's hand one more time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." "Thank you," Helena replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. "For always wanting a family, for being willing to love mine, for giving me more happiness than I ever thought possible." They walked into the house together, hand in hand, ready to greet whatever the evening brought. Behind them, the Montana night settled over the ranch, peaceful and star-bright, a benediction on a love story that had transformed 2 lonely people into a family, a house into a home, and strangers into the greatest love either of them had ever known. The years that followed brought the usual mix of joy and sorrow that makes up a life well lived. There were more grandchildren, a whole passel of them eventually, who filled the ranch house with noise and laughter during holidays and summer visits. There were losses too, friends and neighbors passing, the inevitable march of time that took beloved faces and left only memories behind. But through it all, Helena and Josiah remained each other's constants, the steady center around which everything else revolved. When Josiah turned 70, the family threw him a party that brought people from all over the county. The ranch yard was filled with tables groaning under the weight of food, and music and dancing lasted well into the night. Helena, now 60, watched her husband laugh and talk with their children and grandchildren, and she marveled at the life they had built together. Thomas, now 45 and weathered like his stepfather, stood to make a toast, raising his glass high. "To Pa," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "He is not the man who gave me life, but he is the man who showed me how to live it. He taught me to work hard, to treat people fairly, to love my family fiercely. He took on 4 grieving boys and loved us like we were his own, and there is no gift greater than that. So here is to you, Pa, and to many more years of your wisdom and guidance." The crowd cheered, and Josiah stood, his eyes suspiciously bright, and embraced Thomas. One by one, the other sons came forward, each sharing their own memories and gratitude. William talked about the patience Josiah had shown teaching him about horses. Daniel credited Josiah with teaching him the value of honest work and fair dealing. Robert, who had become a successful artist, spoke of how Josiah had encouraged his talent even when it made no sense to anyone else. James, strong and capable at 23, simply said that his father was his hero, and Grace, 19 and about to start teaching at the school in Benton, said her father had shown her that a real man was one who was not afraid to be gentle and kind. When it was Helena's turn to speak, she found herself overwhelmed with emotion. "When I came to Montana Territory 30 years ago," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "I was a widow with 4 hungry sons and more fear than hope. I did not expect love when I answered Josiah's advertisement. I expected security, perhaps kindness if I was lucky, but not love. not the kind of deep, abiding love that has sustained me through 3 decades. Josiah, you have been my rock, my partner, my greatest blessing. You always said you wanted a family, and you took on mine without hesitation. You gave my sons a father, and me a reason to believe in love again. I thank God every day that I stepped off that stagecoach in Benton and found you waiting for me. Josiah pulled her into his arms, not caring about the crowd of witnesses, and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and catcalls of their family and friends. You were worth the wait, he told her, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Every lonely year before you came was worth it, because it led me to you. They danced that night under the Montana stars, slower than they once had but no less in love, surrounded by the family they had built together. And as Helena looked around at her sons and their wives, at her younger children now grown, at the grandchildren playing in the yard, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and contentment. She had come west looking for survival and had found a life beyond her wildest dreams. The autumn of their lives was as peaceful as they could have hoped. James took over more of the daily running of the ranch, as Josiah's joints began to protest the years of hard work. Grace, married to a teacher she had met in Benton, lived close enough to visit often, bringing her own children to learn the ways of the ranch. The older boys were frequent visitors, and the ranch house was rarely empty of family. Helena's hair turned completely white, and Josiah's broad shoulders began to stoop slightly with age, but they remained devoted to each other, still holding hands as they walked, still sharing a bed and whispered conversations in the dark, still looking at each other with love and appreciation after all their years together. One spring morning when Helena was 68 and Josiah was 78, they took a slow walk down to the creek, the same creek where Josiah had taught her sons to fish all those years ago. They sat on the bank, and Josiah pointed out the various improvements that had been made over the years, talking about the history of the land they had shaped together. "You ever regret it?" Helena asked, echoing the question she had asked him so many times over the years. Marrying a widow with 4 sons, instead of finding yourself a young bride who could have given you a houseful of your own children. Josiah turned to her, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "Helena Zimmerman, after nearly 40 years of marriage, do you really still doubt how I feel? You and those 4 boys were the best thing that ever happened to me. I got 6 children out of the deal, not to mention grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and I got to spend my life with the woman I love. No regrets, Helena, not a single one." "No regrets," Helena echoed, leaning against his shoulder. Her body was tired these days, worn out from years of hard work and multiple childbirths, but her heart was full. She had lived a good life, a rich life, surrounded by love and family. She had known deep sorrow in losing Samuel, but she had also known profound joy in finding Josiah. They sat by the creek until the sun began to climb high in the sky, talking about the past and watching the water flow endlessly by. When they finally rose to walk back to the house, they moved slowly, their hands clasped, supporting each other as they had for nearly 4 decades. The seasons continued to change, bringing Helena and Josiah into the deep winter of their years. They had lived to see all their children settled and happy, to hold great-grandchildren in their arms, to know that the legacy they had built together would continue long after they were gone. The ranch that had once been a lonely bachelor's domain had become a family empire, with James managing the original property, and the older boys all settled on surrounding land, creating a community bound by blood and love. On a cold December morning when Helena was 73, she woke to find Josiah's side of the bed empty. Alarmed, she rose and found him standing at the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "Josiah, what is wrong?" He turned to her, and she saw peace in his face rather than distress. "Nothing is wrong," he said, opening his arms to her. She went to him, and he enfolded her in his embrace. "I was just thinking about the first winter we spent together, how nervous we both were, how uncertain, and look at us now. We made it, Helena. We built something lasting and good." "We did," she agreed, holding him tight. "We surely did." When Josiah passed quietly in his sleep 3 years later at the age of 86, Helena mourned deeply but without regret. They had been granted 45 years together, a lifetime of love and partnership. The funeral drew people from across Montana, a testimony to the life he had lived and the impact he had made. All 6 of his children were there, the 4 he had chosen and the 2 he had fathered, and not one of them made any distinction between the relationships. To all of them, he had simply been Pa, the man who had loved them unconditionally. Helena lived 3 more years after Josiah's death, surrounded by her ever-growing family. She spent her days in a rocking chair on the porch he had built, watching the ranch bustle with activity, holding great and great-great-grandchildren, telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. She spoke often of Josiah, keeping his memory alive, making sure the youngest generation knew about the lonely rancher who had placed an advertisement for a bride and gotten a ready-made family instead. On a quiet spring evening with wildflowers blooming across the Montana grasslands, Helena passed away peacefully in her sleep, her hands folded over the quilt that Josiah's mother had made, the same quilt that had covered the bed in the room he had prepared for her all those years ago. Her children laid her to rest beside Josiah in the family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read, "Helena Zimmerman, beloved wife and mother." The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, a lasting testament to the love story that had begun with a lonely rancher and a desperate widow. The house remained the gathering place for the sprawling family, filled during holidays and summer months with the descendants of that unlikely union, all of them bearing the legacy of 2 people who had taken a chance on each other and built something beautiful from it. In the end, Helena and Josiah's story was not extraordinary because of grand gestures or dramatic events, but because of the steady, faithful love that had sustained them through decades of ordinary life. They had proven that family is not always about blood, that love can bloom even in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest adventure is simply opening your heart to the possibility of connection. The lonely rancher had wanted a family, and the desperate widow had needed security, and together they had created something neither could have built alone: a home, a legacy, and a love story for the ages.